It is hard to imagine the extent to which the automobile has shaped our modern-day lives. More difficult still is to imagine our world without them in it. Automobiles are ubiquitous, and use of them stretches from industry to individual. Barring those who predominantly use active forms of transport, they are a dominant factor in shaping our everyday interactions with our environment. They are both a boon and a bane, providing freedom and the ability to effectively cut travel times, but at the cost of dramatically altering our urban environment, being the primary consumer of both gas and oil, and one of the top emitters of pollution into our atmosphere. Cities are designed around the personal car, with roadways devised to get people from one distant place to another. Very rarely are our city streets free from automobiles, with noise, congestion, and pollution blighting our urban environment, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to find places within the urban setting that are free from the ills caused by traffic. The car, and in effect, the roadways and arterial networks created to support them, are a huge consumer of public and personal space. Automobiles have become so ubiquitous that in places like Calgary, some people have even started paving their front lawn in order to create more space to park their multiple vehicles. But how did we get here? What factors have contributed to our autocentric and auto-dependent modern world? Leading up until the 1950s, American and Canadian cities alike favored a transit and pedestrian-oriented gridiron road pattern. Buildings were closely packed, residential densities were high, and for most, the distance between home, work, and shopping was short and often accomplished by foot. However, by 1945, a transition began to occur. Facilitated by economic prosperity, car ownership became the norm, and urban development began to largely favor the personal automobile, leading to car-oriented suburban development taking place. People were drawn to the large single-family dwellings on equally large lots, with ample indoor and outdoor space, far from the perceived ills of inner-city living. Urban sprawl, the bane of city planners and ecologists alike, can largely be accounted for by use of the automobile, with communities continuously creeping out into previously rural areas that are inaccessible without the use of an automobile due to their remote location. Large numbers of people now call suburbia home, and most commute to the central business districts of their cities, where huge swaths of land are given over to garages and parking lots to house their vehicles. North America's comparatively high ecological footprint can be partially accounted for by the phenomenon of urban sprawl, as this method of dispersed development has implications in car versus transit use, home energy consumption, and efficiency of land use. The type of house one lives in and its location are the two major elements contributing to the size of someone's housing footprint. Suburbs are generally characterized by low-density housing on large lots. These developments average much higher footprints because they eat up so much land for the lots themselves, and for the roads needed to transport people to and from these developments. The homes require a great deal of energy and building materials needed to maintain them, and as a result of their increasingly far distances from the urban center, there is an increased carbon load that is deposited into the atmosphere when these suburbanites travel to work and back again. According to Statistics Canada, 74% of commuters drive to work or school, with only 5.4% making their trips as passengers. It only takes a brief trip outside to see a visual representation of these numbers, with many 4 to 8 passenger vehicles transporting just one person. Our roads are filled with inefficient gas-guzzling vehicles, namely SUVs and trucks. And according to the EPA, transportation is the largest single source of air pollution in the United States, with on-road vehicles contributing over 33% of carbon monoxide and nitrous oxides into the atmosphere, and it accounts for over 20% of the total pollution implicated in global warming. Pollution caused by automobiles starts with their manufacture, is most salient during their operation, and continues well into their disposal. The major forms of primary and secondary pollution caused by automobiles are particulate matter, which have the potential to penetrate deep into the lungs, hydrocarbons, which irritate the respiratory system, nitrous oxides, which cause lung irritation and weaken immune response to respiratory infection, carbon monoxide, which, when inhaled, can block oxygen from reaching vital organs such as the brain and heart, sulfur dioxide, hazardous air pollutants like benzene, which the EPA estimates 1/2 of all cancers caused by air pollution are from, and greenhouse gases. Rising consumer demand for a greater variety of features in personal cars throughout the years has led to greater gas use and thus increased pressure to drill for oil. The implications of drilling for oil and the proliferation of the personal automobile share a complex and problematic relationship. In 2006, George Bush famously said, "We're addicted to oil," a comment on the consumption of 20 million barrels of oil products a day in the USA. And of those 20 million barrels, 14 million barrels are dedicated to transportation fuel each and every day. The environmental consequences of oil addiction are manifold, and at this point it is common knowledge that exposure to crude oil, its refined products, and their byproducts can have severe consequences for both ecosystems and human health. In Canada, the government has sold hundreds of acres of our once pristine forests, and now the landscape in northern Alberta looks like something out of a science fiction novel, with open-pit mines and toxic tailings ponds a regular feature, both of which will no doubt leave behind a horrible legacy for future generations. Corroded pipelines, tanker crashes, and rail derailments all have the potential to spill into our environment, which can severely harm wildlife and significantly reduce water quality. In the pursuit for ever more oil, offshore drilling is becoming more prominent, and dangerous technologies such as fracking have emerged. The cost our global environment pays not only in oil extraction, but from the chemicals and toxins produced in the gas combustion process are startling, all for the convenience of driving from A to B. Automobile use has dramatically reduced our air quality, altered our landscapes, and gobbled up stores of fossil fuels. And even though fuel economy is advancing, more and more cars are added to the road each year, further worsening the problem. Some policy has been enacted in Canada to combat, or at least offset, car pollution. For instance, British Columbia implemented a revenue-neutral carbon tax in 2008. It gives individuals, business, and industry incentive to be less reliant on fossil fuels and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It also ensures that those who do produce emissions pay for it while making clean energy alternatives more attractive. For the cost of only 0.07 cents a liter, you can use the local and global atmosphere as a sink to absorb the emissions from your car. Federal policy was also enacted to curb emissions under the Canada Vehicle Efficiency Initiative. A rebate was offered to people purchasing new automobiles, and, barring trucks, a so-called green levy was placed on vehicles with poor fuel efficiency. This put money back into the pockets of smart consumers and cost those buying inefficient vehicles. However, the program was eventually quashed, and now the government has a webpage dedicated to informing the customer, with guides on how to supposedly use your purchasing power for the good of the environment. It's a nice thought, but only really useful for a conscientious minority of customers who could be bothered to take the time to research how they can reduce their footprint by improving their efficiency. At home in Edmonton, Statistics Canada reports that 70% of residents drive to work or school. Between the years 2012 and 2014, our population increased by 60,000 people. Edmonton is reported as being the second fastest growing city in Canada, and in a study conducted between 2006 and 2011, it was found that 93% of our growth occurred in suburban or low-density rural areas, where over 50% of inhabitants commute via car into the city. This sort of development is not sustainable, and it is costly to build the necessary infrastructure to support these so-called bedroom communities. City officials must promote infill and start building up, as our population will no doubt continue to increase. With the continued surge of newcomers to our province, it will inevitably mean more cars on our already congested roads, more civic money spent on infrastructure, more pollution in our air, increased suburban sprawl, and of course, an ever-increasing demand for oil.